Sheikh Hasina survived the carnage of August 15, 1975 by sheer chance. Hasina, who was then 28, happened to be abroad when almost all members of her family, including her father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the founding father of Bangladesh, were killed at her residence in Dhaka by a group of army personnel. She then spent years in India. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, she remobilised the Awami League, Mujib's party, which played a crucial role in bringing down the military dictatorship of Muhammad Ershad in 1990. 6 years later, the Awami League defeated the Bangladesh Nationalist Party of Khaleda Zia, and Ms. Hasina became the Prime Minister for the first time. She returned to power after an interregnum in 2009. In the subsequent 15 years, Sheikh Hasina oversaw economic progress in Bangladesh. The country saw millions being lifted out of poverty. Her government won international praise for hosting millions of Rohingya Muslim refugees who fled violence in neighbouring Myanmar. She set up a war crimes tribunal to hold those who aided the genocide of the 1970s accountable. She won back-to-back elections, the latest victory being in January 2024. Still, everything Sheikh Hasina built came crashing like a castle in the sand on August 5th. The Iron Lady of Bangladesh had to resign and leave the country. What went wrong for the most powerful Prime Minister Bangladesh had had in a generation? Hello everyone, welcome to Realpolitik. This is Johny, the Hindu's International Affairs Editor. To understand what went wrong for Hasina, it is important to understand what kind of a Bangladesh she was in charge of. The trigger of the set of events that led to Ms. Hasina's downfall was an unpopular quota system for government jobs. The system was originally introduced by Mujib after the liberation of Bangladesh. More than 50% of government jobs in Bangladesh were reserved for different sections, of which 30% were for the descendants of the freedom fighters, those who had participated in the liberation war, in other words, Awami League. Ms. Hasina had done away with this quota system in 2018 after protests. In June 2024, the old system was reinstated by the Bangladesh High Court. This triggered student protests, first on university campuses, which then spread across the country. But Ms. Hasina had another problem: lack of political legitimacy for her government. In Bangladesh, the opposition and the government have historically had a hostile relationship. Ahead of the 2018 elections, Khaleda Zia, the former Prime Minister and BNP chairperson, was sentenced to a 5-year jail term, which was later extended to 10 years. Leaders of Jamaat-e-Islami, the radical Islamist party, were convicted and hanged by the War Crimes Tribunal. The BNP, the main opposition, had boycotted back-to-back elections, and independent analysts had flagged irregularities in the election process over the years. Opposition leaders were routinely harassed. Legal challenges were mounted against the Prime Minister's rivals. The space for opposition politics shrank over the years. But for large sections of Bangladesh's population, Ms. Hasina was a force of stability who turned around the country's economy. Bangladesh witnessed sustained economic growth, a major jump in GDP per capita, and substantial improvement in social indicators. Poverty declined from 11.8% in 2010 to 5% in 2022, based on the international poverty line of $2.15 a day, according to the World Bank. But the economic story faced challenges in recent years. First, after the strike of the COVID pandemic, and then the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war. GDP growth plunged to 3.4% in 2020 from 7.9% the previous year, according to the IMF data. And the economy is still in a recovery mode. The Ukraine war led to a spike in oil and food prices. Inflation went up to 10%, and the country has one of the highest youth unemployment rates in South Asia at about 20%. As the economy slowed, employment opportunities in the private sector shrank. And when the High Court ordered the reinstatement of the reservation system, it angered the already frustrated students. The anger lit the fuse, and the opposition, which has been living under Ms. Hasina's tight grip for power over 15 years, joined in. Ms. Hasina made a lot of mistakes as well. She erred in understanding the depth of the students' anger. She also miscalculated the strength of her political opponents. She called the protesters Razakars, a derogatory term which was used to refer to those who helped the Pakistani military during the Liberation War. This inflamed passions. And Ms. Hasina made the mistake which authoritarian rulers always make: bank on excessive force to quell an uprising. She unleashed both the police personnel and Awami League activists on the protesters, who were also violent. In July, some 200 people were killed, mostly protesters. The government said hundreds of police personnel were also wounded. After the first round of protests, the Bangladesh Supreme Court scaled back the reservation system, capping the reservation for the descendants of the freedom fighters at 5%. The students here won a major victory, but they were not yet ready to call off the protests. On August 4th, Sunday, they called for another round of protests with a new demand. Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister, must go. They also demanded accountability for the deaths of over 200 of their comrades. The Awami League called for counter-mobilization of its members. Dhaka, a megacity of 10 million people, was set for a massive showdown with student protesters who were backed by the BNP and Jamaat-e-Islami on the one side, and the security personnel and Awami League activists on the other. More than 100 people were killed in the ensuing violence in a single day. The government curbed access to communication networks and issued curfew orders. Students urged for more protests for Monday, August the 5th. By that time, it was evident that Sheikh Hasina's position had substantially been weakened. The military said it would guard its constitutional obligations but won't use force against the protesters. Students had asked the protesters to assemble at Gono Bhavan, the official residence of the Prime Minister, in the afternoon of August 5th. After holding talks with the security establishment, Ms. Hasina resigned and left the country for India. Ms. Hasina was the second leader in South Asia who was forced out of power by mass protests. In July 2022, Sri Lanka's elected President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was forced to resign and leave the country amid massive protests triggered by an economic meltdown. The island country, however, saw an orderly political transition. The country's political class backed Ranil Wickremesinghe, a seasoned politician and former Prime Minister, as the new president. Sri Lanka is now preparing for a presidential election later this year, even though the country is yet to recover from the economic crisis. But the situation in Bangladesh looks gloomier. The army chief has announced an interim government, which is to be headed by Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus, a key demand of the protesters. The president has dissolved parliament and announced that the country will soon have a general election. However, it is not clear what role the military, which had in the past directly ruled the country, would play during the transition. It is also not clear what kind of influence Jamaat-e-Islami, a majoritarian fundamentalist group with a bloodied past in Bangladesh, will wield over the new administration. There are already reports of widespread violence against Bangladesh's minority communities, Ahmadis, and Awami League functionaries. The interim administration would also find it difficult to bring in order after the chaos of the past month. Bangladesh's polity stands broken. Ms. Hasina may be out of Bangladesh, but the Awami League would stay a force in the country. And moreover, the economic woes are looming large over the next government. Tough days are ahead for Bangladesh. Thank you very much. For more such videos, subscribe to The Hindu.